Welcome to the Enrich Assess training module where we're going to be looking at roster reports and specifically the performance groups roster reports that are available on any class roster and visible for teachers, school administrators, or district administrators. I'm logged in as a teacher, and on my home page I can see that my classes are all listed here in the middle toward the bottom. Each section is listed with the number of students in each section. And I'm going to click on my first section, which is section 6, where, as you may recall, you can see your students listed alphabetically and see that at-a-glance view of each student. And over on the right side, I see my test score reports listed, several of these, followed by grade reports. So we're going to start at the top looking at the performance group report that's based on one score. So what it's going to do is arrange my students into columns based on the score that I choose. When I select that, it's going to prompt me for what test do I want to view. And when I click the drop down, I see all the possible tests that are available, and your list might look a little bit different than this, but I'm going to look at my SC Ready. And I can either scroll or I can just type. What I did was type the letters SC, and it took me to those tests starting with the letter S. And I'll choose my SC Ready, and then it'll prompt me for what administration. Well, I've only got one at this point in time, 2016, and then I choose what score I'm interested in. In this case, mostly with a performance groups report, you'll probably want to look at level type scores as opposed to numeric or scale scores. So if I choose ELA performance level, that's a good one to look at. I'm going to click Run. And it's going to arrange those students into columns based on the levels. So it starts with does not meet expectations. I see there are 4 students in that column. All my students that approach expectations, followed by meets expectations and exceeds expectations. So I kind of see this bell-shaped curve arrangement here, which is pretty common when you look at a group of students. And what I can see is that each student is listed as a link. So if I want to drill down to that particular student, I can click on their name, or I can click on their actual score. So AE here beside Elena means approaches expectations. If I want to see more detail, I can click on that score, and it takes me directly to her detail scores for SC Ready ELA. I can see all the other scores that are available, as well as that comparison to her peers that appears in the chart to the right. Now, all I'm going to do is click the back button, and that will take me back to my report. I'd like to point out that there's a drop down that says Students on Roster. If you're looking at a current list of your students, you're going to see that this is by default based on currently. That is, all the students that are currently on my roster. Because I'm looking at a prior year roster, for my training information isn't totally current as of today, it defaults to the last 30 days of class. So this is the students that were on my roster in the last 30 days of the class during the year that I'm looking at. So this report is helpful in grouping your students based on their performance on a given score, so that you can plan your instruction and group your students likewise by what they need to work on. Now I can choose different scores from my score list. After looking at performance level, I may choose to pick a different score, let's say scale score or percentile rank. Now those two, keep in mind, are numeric scores. So if I choose percentile rank and click Run, Enrich will do its best to determine what the column ranges are. So my student scores vary from 19 up to 81, and Enrich divides those into columns from 20 to 39, 40 to 59, 60 to 79, and then 80 or higher. So it's divided those students up, and again we see kind of that bell-shaped curve. But the performance levels are the ones that are well defined and give you columns that are a little more predictable. So now that we've looked at performance groups based on one score, let's go back to our roster and look at the next performance groups. I can click on my Students tab to return back to that roster view. And then looking back over to the right, we see the second option is Performance Groups 2 scores. So this is going to give us more of a grid view. When I select this report, it's basically going to ask me for the test and administration and score, but it's going to do it twice. One for the column view and one for the row view. In this example, I think I'd like to compare my students' ELA levels with their science. So that's going to be two different tests, although I could compare two different scores from the same test. So I'm going to start with my SC Ready, and I'm going to choose the administration and the column. So I'm going to choose that ELA performance level. Then I'll go to my next set of scores, which is the rows. So the first are columns, the next are rows, and I'm going to choose Pass because that's where my science scores are. Choose my administration, and then in Pass I'll go down to my science and choose the level scores there. And when I click Run, as I said, I end up with more of a grid. It's not just columns, but it's columns and rows. And I see the SC Ready ELA performance level label is at the top, whereas the Pass Science label is on the left. So what that means is, as I see my SC Ready, let's say I pick my Meets Expectations column, I see those students who are Meets Expectations on SC Ready in this column. And then over on the left, as I look at the rows, I'll see my Not Met students in this row, and my Met students here, and my exemplary students here. So I find that the most interesting information in these kinds of reports is looking at kind of the edges. So for instance, if I look out here, I see I have two students that were exceeded expectations on the ELA performance level on SC Ready, and those were not met for the Pass Science. And I see both of the scores. So I see one student's name, I see the not met, and then the exceeds expectations. And the one associated with the column is lifted a little bit higher, just to visually let me align what the score is associated with. And for instance, if I go down here to my exemplary row for science, I see one student who's exemplary in science but did not meet expectations on my ELA. And the other groupings are shown here in the various grids. Again, I can click down to the detail scores by clicking on the actual scores themselves. So this is a useful report that will allow you to compare two different scores for the same group of students, or to select the same score but choose two different time frames. So maybe last year versus this year, or fall versus spring, and see how those students line up with the two scores.